Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cleve Podcast. Before we dive in, I want to say this. If you've ever felt like, why can't my parents just understand me? Or why does this feel so impossible to repair? Or even, am I the problem here? This episode is going to give you language for that. Because what we're really talking about today is this: why different generations see reality so differently, why accountability feels impossible for some people, and why so many relationships are breaking, even when there's still love there. This isn't just psychology, this is generational, this is spiritual. And if you can understand it, it will change how you see your family and also yourself. Let's jump into it. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Cleve Podcast.
Hi, we're happy to be here.
One thing I wanted to mention at the beginning of this episode, you may not know this, Ashley and we always start before we hit record with a prayer. And I just wanted to let you all know that we love and care about each of you deeply. And we think about you when we think about these episodes. And we try to look at it from every angle possible of how will these words impact different people that might be listening. And this episode in particular, it crosses, let's say, generational divides. And a lot of people might look at it through different lenses. And so, I don't know. I was just thinking about everybody when Ashley said the prayer before we hit record and wanted to share that with you. This is a spiritual work for us, but it's like, even though we're speaking into a microphone into this abyss, the reality of the calling that we have to share this is not lost on us. And we think about each of you and pray about you as well.
Yeah, and I would just say that is true. It is the driving force behind doing the podcast is just this feeling of need to educate others with the principles and the different things that we've learned.
Like we
Yeah.
know many of your names because you reach out to us and we hear your stories. And this week especially, I think it felt maybe even a little heavier as we had more individual situations come in. And like Ash and I would talk like in the bathroom while we're getting ready for the morning. And it would just be like, did you read that? And it's heartbreaking to see what so many people are going through. And we both always have this desire to help make the world better and try to solve problems. The problems that exist in kind of this generational healing, family systems world is enormous. It is not something that we can do entirely on our own. And I think today's conversation is going to be, I think it's one of my favorite topics that you and I have discussed over the last 5 years. And we talk about it repeatedly because we just believe knowledge is power. And when you know better, you can do better. But when you have problems, rather than just like being mad and frustrated at the problem, step one needs to be to try to understand that problem. Seek first to understand and then to be understood. And so we've really gone down the rabbit hole. One of the books that changed my life and perspective, I listened to it on audiobook while I was riding my road bike over the course of one summer. But it's Oprah Winfrey's book entitled What Happened to You. And it's instead of what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. And that is where a lot of curiosity can come into play. But that's where healing can take place, is because we can really dive into what were the circumstances that brought us to this point, so that how can we then heal and do better. So it'll be good.
Yeah. And even understanding why people end up where they are. I've always used that to help myself educate on how I can make sure that my kids don't fall into certain traps. And I mean, ultimately, I can't make sure. We can't, but we can be educated and do the best we can, educating ourselves. Okay, why do kids fall into drug abuse or addiction or even tampering with those things? What's going on emotionally that causes some kids to reach for that and others don't? There's something deeper going on.
Yeah. So to set the framework, we talk to a lot of adult children that are estranged from their parents, but we sometimes have people on the other end too, and some that it's just on the periphery or tangentially there. But some common tensions that we see is you'll see adult children. I'm 42 as of Sunday. Ashley's 43. And It's adult children that are expressing hurt to parents, and then the parents respond with defensiveness or silence. There is a request for repair, but then that request is then interpreted as disrespect by the parents. And then the parents will, and again, these are generalizations, but they will often say things like, "We did the best that we could. You're rewriting history. Why can't you just move on?" Then the adult children say, "I just want acknowledgement. I want accountability. I want honesty. I want the relationship to be real." And so you have these sides and these tensions, and it when you don't get curious with it, and Ashley and I have had these moments, you want to scream as loud as possible because you're like, why won't you do this? Whatever that is. And you can't control somebody, but you're like, how come you can't see it the way we see it? Why can't you just acknowledge it and take accountability? Why can't you do X, Y, and Z? And we have to get curious with it to really understand each of these generations and why they are the way they are.
And I would say, as we have gotten curious and learned about why the previous generations are the way they are, we have learned a lot that has actually given us a lot of compassion and understanding that we each have a part to play in life and in the generations and our different responsibilities. And maybe ours is different than theirs was.
Maybe start off with the study you just did this morning about how the generations repeat themselves. I think might be a good framework before we dive into each of the generations. So we're going to go through each of the generations super high level, but I thought that this was interesting that could tee up that discussion.
Yeah. Okay. So this is called the Strauss-Howe generational theory. And it's just a theory that societies like the United States tend to follow a reoccurring cycle of about 80 to 100 years long. History tends to move in repeating generational cycles. They swing back and forth. And it basically said that when people are raised in chaos, they tend to work really hard to value stability. But then people raised in stability then push for change. And so we see this a lot, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but World War II and the silent generation that came from that kind of grew up as children in World War II, how they approached life, and then the stability that they created, and then what their kids ended up doing, which is pushing for a lot of change. You look in the 70s, they're pushing the boundaries on modesty, sex, drug abuse. It's like this freedom thing, because when you're raised in chaos, the war created a desire for stability, but that stability, it honors institutions and conformity. And so they have that and they work really hard for it and they build up the stability, but then their children feel too controlled by it. So they're pushing. And this cycle repeats itself. And I thought that was really interesting because I feel like I can see that within the scope of my grandparents down to like current
Yeah.
day.
So you can look at it through like your lived experience. Ashley and I are both elder millennials. Her parents come from the silent generation. My parents are baby boomers. And so we'll be sharing some of our perspective through that. But even if you look further back than our lifetime, and I think about the founding fathers, for example, I imagine that their generation was one of those activist generations that wanted change. And that was why that period ignited that, right? And then there's periods that follow. And so, anyways, just thinking about that, humans are quite predictable. And we as a people and generationally, I think if we understand it, we will see why we behave the way we do. So let's dive in. Again, we're only going to go in our lifetime. And by that, I mean those that we have associated with. So some of the demographic information. So we're going to kick it off with the silent generation. The birth years were roughly 1928 to 1945. So, Ash, what is the silent generation all about? What are their key characteristics?
Well, the silent generation was the war. They grew up as children during the war. My parents are on the tail end of that. It ends in 1945. My parents were born in 1942 and 43. But they really did learn to just honor and respect institutions and authority like crazy. And it was interesting because in the beginning of my journey, I sat down with a therapist and I just said, look, we have a lot of problems. I love my parents deeply, but they don't address the truth. And it was high level how I put it. And he just said, look, you need to understand something. They came from the war generation and their parents who lived the war generation and were trying to raise families. And he said they didn't address truth back then because they needed stability. And so they learned to be actors for survival. In the 1930s and 40s, a man who was having an affair or had a drinking problem, society would not have employed that kind of man. He would have lost his job. And yet we know that these problems come from deep emotional wounds that often people, they just act out and feel that they can't control them, especially if they don't know that there are resources to help and where it's coming from, right? So they learn to just sweep things under the rug. They learn to be one person at work and then maybe even at home and then another person acting out
Yeah, they
whatever their
compartmentalize their
wounds
life.
were,
Yeah.
right? You don't talk about it. You don't address it because your entire livelihood was at stake if you did. And the undercurrents of emotions in our homes are very real and provide more teaching than even the words that we say, probably. It's who we are and the unspoken words that have the most power, actually. And I think that generation, yes, they learned to not address reality and just put on a really good face. And I've said this before, but I like the movie The Help. It shows that this was a problem in society. It, of course, is a problem in religious institutions, but it bleeds through everywhere. And I love the movie, and it was originally a book. But The Help just shows this, how society, it was so much about what you were showing to society and your community, who you were and your reputation that meant everything.
Yeah. So if you have a parent that fits into that generation, then it makes a lot of sense, right? You're
Yeah.
like, oh, this is a generational issue, not just that my parents are messed up
Yeah.
and they
Well,
won't talk about
and
it.
that therapist ended up telling me this was the most important part. He just said, look, what you are wanting from your parents, they don't even have like the wiring in their brains to do it. They don't have the ability and the neurological connections have not been formed to talk about the truth and reality the way that your brain allows you to, because it was never taught and modeled to them. They didn't make those brain connections in their formative years. And I just thought that was so interesting. And not that you can't grow them later, but that's just the way they were conditioned and they never have taken the opportunity. And so truth feels very, very scary to them and addressing truth.
Yeah. And I think that that immediately tapped into the experiences that we had when we went to go and talk specifically to Ashley's parents about some of these things. They just looked at us in a blank stare. And sometimes they'd be like, what? And we're like, how do you not
Yeah,
understand?
and because that's what they had learned to do. Like it's like in the back of their minds, they know that their parents are flawed, but they have this fear of, but I just need to honor them. So they discount the flaws and don't look at them.
Yeah.
And they just honor, but almost through fear because they're so afraid to see the cracks because they're afraid of what that means for them. And I don't know. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
So here's some of the high level facts, too, to just sum up the silent generation. We'll go into the baby boomers. Their emotional culture, feelings were secondary to survival. Stoicism was a virtue. Children were expected to obey, not process. Common family dynamics, emotional restraint, hierarchical family structure. Children rarely question parents. Their core belief system, private matters stay private. Work hard, keep your head down, don't complain. And for many in this generation, emotional expression felt dangerous because stability depended on order. So that kind of sums up who that generation is. So let's dive into the baby boomers second. Baby boomers were then the next generation born between 1946 and 1964. And the boomers were raised by the silent generation. So think about the dynamic between those two generational kind of poles there. It was a very unique tension between those. And they inherited from the silent generation discipline, loyalty, and also emotional suppression. But these individuals lived through the civil rights movement, Vietnam, the sexual revolution, massive economic expansion. So
many of them actually did push for change, but again, many of them were ruled by that emotional suppression as well.
well, and it seems in looking at the studies on it that it's almost like the boomer generation had these polarizations between them. You have the traditionalist boomer that values authority and order, and they believe that respect means compliance. And I think within conservative religious environments, the traditionalist boomer fits into that category. But then you have the counterculture boomer, which is the ones that rebelled culturally and often, though, still carried emotional patterns from their parents. And so you have these polarizations. It was an interesting, just breaking generation.
Yeah. And it actually, that study that I talked about earlier, the Strauss study, talked about how some of the strongest change makers actually came from the silent generation. And they said Martin Luther King Jr., Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and others, they were called the silent generation, but they broke out of it and
they were the silent or the baby boomers?
They were the silent,
oh,
but
okay.
They created massive change. And I think a little bit of a roadmap for the silent generation to break out more. But it is interesting because you can have within the extremes then these personalities who see it and feel it and break out.
Well, and one thing that was interesting too when we were looking at kind of the data, boomers often challenged institutions, but they didn't necessarily challenge family emotional systems. So they learned to question government and other institutions, but not their parents. They were still very much in the honor thy father and thy mother environment within, religious groups.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So then let's dive into, sorry for those, we're going to be skipping a generation here and we're going right into millennials because that's who we are. And
wait, what's the generation between?
It's Gen X.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We don't know anything about Gen X, even though all of my siblings are that generation.
Yeah, we probably should study that, but we're talking about parents and children.
Yep.
And I do feel like while some of you might be Gen X that are listening, I don't mean to just discount that, but I think that the estrangement epidemic is what often gets communicated to us on the social channels. There's a very interesting study that nearly 30% of all millennials are estranged from a family member. And I think it was from at least one parent, if not both. And that is a staggering statistic. And I think that number is growing, and there is a problem there. Now, is estrangement new? No. I mean, we've studied the Bible backwards and forwards. These generational, talk about Cain and Abel, right? Like, go all the way back there. The family became estranged because of a major conflict. So this is not new, but it is on our horizon in a totally different way. And we obviously just really resonate with the millennial generation. So this is birth years of 1981 to 1996. And millennials were shaped by therapy culture. Like, previous generations thought that therapy was with a bunch of whack jobs.
Oh, my whole life I heard that.
Yeah, and they still believe it.
People who need therapists, and it's that, and
like that you have a major psychological problem, like you need to be in a psych ward to need a therapist.
And if a person is a therapist, that means that they are really dysfunctional.
Yeah,
that they needed to overcome, and that messaging was even given to me well through adulthood.
But we have psychology becomes more mainstream, the internet democratizing information, conversations start evolving around trauma. And key differences in this generation is that millennials were raised hearing things not necessarily from their parents, but through society, school, whatever, and certainly the internet, right? The advent of the internet came within our generation. But to talk about your feelings, that's important, to be emotionally aware, to break unhealthy cycles. And so what does this do? This creates major collision between the generations. And millennials say, let's talk about what happened. Boomer parents, or even the silent generation, said they interpret that as that you failed as a parent. And so we had this massive communication gap, and it immediately creates these red flags. And so some people want to minimize it down to, oh, we just believe different things politically. There's something deeper that's going on there. And when I think about my own childhood, I remember in high school, obviously we had the internet, but not on our devices yet. And I remember we had a thing, this was pre social media. It was maybe one of the earliest social media things, and it was called Live Journal. Did you ever have that, honey?
No,
Maybe
you
this
were
was a,
always more techie
I
than
was
me.
more techie in Seattle, is where I grew up. But Live Journal was where you could write journal entries and people could read your journal entries and then respond. And I remember specifically, and you didn't have to be friends, I don't think necessarily to view each other's live journal. I, trusting that process, decided to be incredibly vulnerable and put out there some feelings that I had regarding a girl that I was dating that maybe wasn't reciprocating. I don't remember exactly the
I've
details.
never heard this story. I'm really interested. Keep going.
But, anyways, I remember putting that all out there. And then within a day, she approached me on it. Like, why did you put that all out online? And I'm
Oh,
like,
that's mortifying. How old were you?
I probably a junior or senior in high school. And
Okay.
so, but these were some of the hard lessons that we've learned as millennials in the oversharing of our things. And we started just sharing online and it's, and it still happens to this day, oversharing on stories and posts.
I've
And
never done that. I don't know what you're talking about.
I know you have, we both have,
Many times.
but we're a very expressive generation. And I think it's really cool because it is this massive pool of knowledge and we are thirsty for it. We love new information and we love gathering it from everywhere. And as a result, we are armed with knowledge to a point that, like, when we then go and approach our boomer or silent generation parents with all this knowledge, they look at you like, what? Why don't you just act like the way we were? And they go back and revert. And what we often say this too, like, you can't unsee things and you can't unknow things. And so when you dive in and you're seeking to understand and you're then enlightened and awakened by this knowledge, the genie can't go back in the bottle. Like, you know too much. And then therefore, it's how do we deal with it? And I think that's where we've landed many times is like, no, we can't deny what we know about the damage, the abuse, the
Well,
emotional
and it
abuse and
really is
spiritual
a
abuse. And
spiritual gift. And if you read through scriptures, it talks about it all the time. I was awakened. My eyes were awakened. God awakened me. That is what it's talking about. It's
Mhm.
coming into awareness of like, oh, now I can see and understand and put words to some of these things that I've experienced. But before you're awakened, you really just feel confusion. And confusion comes from Satan. That is not a gift of the Spirit and is not the way Jesus Christ teaches. He teaches with clarity. And that's why when you're awakened, it comes with such clarity because that comes from Jesus Christ. Where before you're awakened, there's confusion. It's like, well, I'm hurt and this hurts, but I love these people and I shouldn't question them, but I have no self-belief and this is painful to me. And it's so many confusing, conflicting thoughts before you're awakened. And yet once you're awakened, it actually is very painful to have the truth and see the truth and process the truth can be extremely painful. And I would say is extremely painful. And I think that's why so many people shy away from it. But if you're willing to, there is incredible clarity that comes with it. And it's easier to process the grief because you're gaining something in return, and that is wisdom and understanding. And it takes a minute, but you really can't forgive until you get there. Because until you can get to wisdom and understanding, you don't really even understand the full scope of what you need to forgive and how you can overcome it.
Love it. So I wanted to dive into 4 or 5 different categories here of the strain that exists on these generations. The first one is awareness, right? And we just talked about that, about how millennials have this now language for the things that they've experienced. And so that's where you have this boom and this surge in understanding in what narcissism is, emotional immaturity, enmeshment, gaslighting, right? Those are like words that previous generations had no clue what those were.
Well, and I'm just going to say, can I just say this really
Yeah.
fast? Like, I can see that I have a little bit of an advantage. I always talk about how I'm the youngest in a family with a lot of dysfunction, and that dysfunction was tried to be buried. But like when you're in the family, you see it. I have a brother who's been a lifelong drug addict. My parents did not grow up with those problems in their families. Like, I was given the opportunity to be like, oh, this is really bad. And I don't want to repeat this. How do I make sure I don't? Whereas, like, my mom's family, for example, like you look at all the children and most of them, they're definitely a couple difficult things, but not to the level that existed within her own children. But she just didn't have any bad examples. She would have never had that thought of how do I not repeat that? It was always just like, oh, everyone's perfect and we need to be too. So there is an advantage of seeing a lot of this dysfunction that kind of gets the wheels turning. Okay.
Yeah. So then the second one, so you go from awareness. The second one here is the expectations of relationships have changed. So previous generations prioritized loyalty and duty, and then millennials prioritize emotional safety and authenticity. And that's where this other tug of war comes. Neither is inherently wrong. They're just different relationship currencies, right? But as a millennial, I'm like, no, I am not going to prioritize loyalty and duty over emotional safety and authenticity. Like that is of the utmost importance. And I feel like I will be loyal to those that value the same things that I value, which is one of which is emotional safety and authenticity, right? Like that is super important to me as a value.
Yeah.
So I can't be in close relationship with people that will completely ignore that. And they only prioritize because we're family. I'm like, not happening. Because I feel like that is where a lot of abuse comes into play.
I just had a coaching call with a person who's struggling with that very thing this week of just like, she's like, I'm entirely unknown. And the pain of that is too much to bear at this point. And you know what? Had I not been through this myself, I maybe wouldn't have fully understood that. But even I myself didn't experience it, but I saw it through you. I saw my husband experience this in my family. And as the years went on, I would see him shrink in the presence of my family more and more and more and more to the point where like he wouldn't contribute to any conversation. And I would just be like, this is so weird because he is amazing. Like, I love his mind. I love his brain. I love his ideas. I love the things that he says. And I love the way that I can respond and he accepts and thinks about and receives the way I respond. Like, we have this relationship that is so rich and deep and meaningful. And I see you and I know you, and yet we would go be with my family and you would just like exist. And over time, like in the beginning, I would be tempted to, I wouldn't say I would blame you, but I would have those thoughts of like, what's wrong with him? Why isn't he talking? And I think I would ask you that, and you would be like, they don't care. They don't want to know. They just want to regurgitate the same old family stories from your childhood and growing up that I've heard 100 times and I can't contribute. And funny enough, without me even saying that, that's what this person that I was coaching said as well. They regurgitate the same family stories. And I'm like, interesting. I've never really had a conversation with somebody where they say that very same thing in the way that I know you experienced it. And I know I've experienced it. But Yeah, there's something about that not being known that really lacks connection.
Yeah. I know. I remember too, one of the last kind of arguments I felt like we had with your parents before estrangement. And this wasn't like the straw that broke the camel's back. And this wasn't even about family patterns necessarily. But do you remember? I think your dad, for his 80th birthday, he wanted to go to Dubai
Oh,
on
I
a
forgot
trip.
about
And he came and it was like, I'd like to go to Dubai and I'd like you all to go. And it's going to be 2 weeks of time and da 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 da. And I'm like, and it was almost like there should be no questions asked. And I remember us pushing back on it a little bit, like taking 2 weeks off is a lot. The time, the money, the expense. Dubai's not necessarily where like high on our priority list right now. And when we were trying to explain that to him, it was like complete shock of like, well, no, this is what we're doing for duty and loyalty to the family.
Yeah, like I'm the patriarch. This is a big milestone for me.
And this is
Everybody's
what
going
I'd
to
like
make
to
a
do. So just
sacrifice.
do it. And
Yeah.
I'm like, no, not gonna. Anyways, it was just an experience that I saw that illustrates the different lines of like there was zero care or regard about that relationship. It was because I'm a son-in-law, I'm going to do it. And I've actually seen this. I talked to one of our followers too this week, and they were like, the family demanded that we invest in the family boat, so we invested in the family boat. And it's like the number of things that some people have done for the sake of loyalty and duty has been enormous financially and otherwise. It can deeply cost people. So, anyways, let's keep moving on. So, that was number two, expectations of the relationship have changed. Number three is therapy culture. I don't think we need to dive into that much more. We've already talked about it. But because of that, the intergenerational examination is unavoidable. The fourth one, though, here is a big one. Accountability feels threatening with the generational gap. So for some parents, acknowledging harm feels like losing authority, admitting failure, and unraveling their identity. So what do? They protect themselves with denial, rewriting history, and then they go to religious and moral superiority. And if I were to sum up not only our estrangement experience, but many others, it really comes down to accountability. That's all millennials want is for you to acknowledge what you've done,
Yeah.
apologize for it, and move forward. And it's like they cannot do it. Like,
And you know what? Even I've even gone so far as to say you don't even have to apologize about the past. I really don't care about the past. I can get over it, but what I do need is changed behavior moving forward. And that's the part that frustrates me. They don't get it enough to be able to change who they are moving forward. So they just continue to harm.
yeah. But I mean, like, here's one. We'll get vulnerable with you all. I don't know if we've ever talked about this on the podcast before. One of the smear campaigns that the family did after we started our no contact period was there was a narrative that I was gay. And there's zero proof or evidence of that. The reasoning when my mom and my mother-in-law actually went to lunch like 4 or 5 months into our kind of no contact period, and my mother-in-law brought this up to my mom. My mom first was like, is there any proof of John being seen with men? And of course there was not. And then
No,
she
you have to relay it the way your mom does. She just said to her, "Well, that's an interesting question, Judy. What evidence do you have that supports that narrative? Has he been caught around town with men?"
yeah.
And she, of course, is horrified. No, nothing like that.
And then this is how she explained it. Well, it's just that he bakes cakes, which I do and have, that are beautiful. I've made many wedding cakes, and it was that. And then I'm 6'4", and her other logic on this rumor that the family at large decided to spread was that I wear short shorts. And again, I'm 6'4", and those of you that know shorts culture in the last 5 years, the shorts are shorter. And that was it. Those were the only two things.
Well, but you and I both know those weren't the two things at all.
I
Those
know.
were the excuses.
Right. And that's the whole point of smear campaigns. There's no logic or reasoning necessarily by it. They wanted to distract from the main point. My point in sharing this, though, is that for me personally, you have addressed it with your mom,
Mhm.
and you have said, Mom, if you will just come to John, acknowledge what's been done, and apologize for it, we can move forward. She will then say in those interactions, I know, I will, and then never does. She will not do it.
Well, she didn't, and she didn't feel sorry. But again, the bigger issue, I think, for both of us is that she can't see it from a different lens moving forward.
Yeah.
And just for context, I do think it is important now that you've brought it up, just for understanding the psychology. Why was the narrative that you were gay suddenly? Because our whole marriage, my family is all about all men constantly do this, this, and this. And it's all around a woman's sexual duty to her husband and the man's needs. And they control and get what they want through this. And so for years, I've been saying, not my husband, not my husband. He wouldn't do that. And so that exposes them, right? And that is threatening to them. And even at the very beginning of our marriage, I really believed all men were like them. So when you weren't, that was confusing to me. And I have never questioned your attraction to me, but there were moments when you are taught to tie your worth into your husband's desire to chase you around the house and get you in bed all day. And then you have a husband who doesn't function like that. That can feel confusing.
Well, but like go back to, okay, let's take this context of sex, for example. You go all the way back to our discussion about expectations within relationships. Prior generations, what did they prioritize? Loyalty and duty. Have you ever heard of duty sex? Right? And it's, well, this is what you owe me as a spouse, right? Where what do millennials value? Emotional safety and authenticity. And so that's what I prioritize in our relationship is I want to make sure that we are both in an emotionally safe place and that we authentically want to show up enthusiastically for that
Well,
experience.
and you care about how I'm showing up. Like,
yeah.
I remember in the beginning, I'd be like, if you're feeling deprived, just tell me. Like, I'll for sure make you happy. And you're
Yeah.
like, that is the last thing in the world I want. This is a we experience.
Mhm.
The two of us. And if you're not as invested in it as I am, I don't want it.
Yeah.
And again, that was like, what? I've never heard
But
a
I
man
actually
say
have never
that.
really looked at it from that lens of that what the different generations prioritize.
Yeah,
That this
that's
is
true.
actually a generational issue,
Yeah.
not just a John's different. I don't know. Maybe there's other millennials that feel different, but I do feel like millennials at large do value that. And that is where we've seen way more equality in genders in our lifetime. And we prioritize that and we are equal partners. And it's much less hierarchical and it's much more of we are equal in this relationship, and previous generations just don't understand that.
Yeah,
So
they don't. And
yeah.
you know what? I think that there's a fair amount of people in our generation who still function like that. And if that's you and you're kind of like, wait, but I am a man, or my husband's that kind of a man, there's growth there for you.
Yeah, try
You
to
know, it doesn't make
understand
you a
why
horrible
that
human being.
mindset is the way it is. Yeah.
That expectation was used in my family to cover and excuse all kinds of infidelity, which is why it became a huge problem. But you can't really become one. I do love the intimacy that exists in that way in a marriage because it is like the crowning act of becoming one. And when you're both known and feel safe and emotionally invested and there for it, like it is a very bonding experience and a fun part of your marriage and something that you don't get anywhere else. And we love it. Whereas, like, my whole life, I just thought, yep, I'll be a good wife and give my husband what he needs so that he can go make the money. And I'm like, when I learned, like, I can have this for me too, and my experience is also going to be prioritized, like, it changed the game for me. And even my love and respect for John, like I've said before, there were moments in the beginning of our marriage where I was like, are you an angel? Like, this is not who I'm told men are. And you are an angel, honey.
Thank you.
But more than anything, you're just much more healthy than the men in my life who were doing the teaching.
Emotionally healthy. And again, is that because I'm a millennial? I need to dive into that a little bit deeper. But I think that that is the blessing of that generation, of our generation, is we have just more emotional intelligence than previous generations. So,
Well, and for you, I will attribute a lot of your health to your mom. I love John's mom for this reason. She's a little bit of a ball buster in her own way, and you just were modeled a very strong mother.
yeah.
And she had to fight to overcome her own narcissistic family dynamics.
Hmm.
And that's come with its own struggles for her. And she's still working through those things and growing. But I love her because it's painful, but she's willing to address them. And she does value truth, even though sometimes it can be painful. But I see in your mom her own ways of growing
Yeah.
and overcoming what she needed to. And I think you were just modeled a mom who was really strong rather than a mom who was really submissive. And I think that helped you a lot.
Oh, for sure. I mean, without question. That was very much modeled to me. And so I've wanted to take all of that, but then also enhance it. And I think that that's the beauty of generational healing and cycle breaking is that it doesn't just all happen at once. It's not all just one person. It is multi-generational. And that is, I think at the crux of it, that is where we've come to find a lot of purpose and meaning in the work that we're doing is because we have such a deep desire to break cycles. We want to do better. And we also have deep faith that our ancestors that have passed on are deeply invested in this work as well. And the whole point of this mortal experience in our belief is that there's a scripture that says the natural man is an enemy to God. And the point of that is that we are here on earth to work out those rough edges and what things are natural man and what things are more of God. And when I study the life of Jesus Christ and I look at Christ-like attributes and who he is and was as a person, he was charitable, he was humble, he was kind, he was loving, and those aren't typical features of the quintessential masculine man. But the beauty of this experience is that as we come together and we cleave as husband and wife, that and as we try to heal those generations, we can become more like Christ in that process. And we don't need to put all those walls and those barriers that emotional health and is just it's powerful, but I think that knowledge is power and that if you're met with resistance in your marriage, in your family, in your friend circles, because you're wanting to do the work of healing generations and doing that emotional work, this is sometimes the first time it's ever been done before. And that's why you're met with so much resistance. And you just need to understand that as you go into it. I think we were more naive in just thinking that, oh, once everyone knows this, they're going to want to jump on board and do this too. And boy, were we
Oh,
wrong.
wow. That was the reality of the century that we had to confront. But yeah, I love what you're saying. And I will just say, from my lens, going with that same theme of generational healing, I had a conversation with one of my cousins today. Most of my cousins won't even. Who I am is very scary to even my extended family. Like this problem, not the detailed problems, but this problem of not like really addressing reality is, I can see a much bigger problem than even just my own family of origin. But anyway, so most relatives really won't have conversations with me, but I do have one cousin who will. And she's always, she's supportive and kind, and what I'm doing might even feel a little extreme to her, but she sees it. And so she said to me this week, she just said, "Ashley, I I know that you have angel ancestors helping you." And I said, "I know I do too. I had an experience years ago where my grandmother, I know she let me know she was helping me." And that was confusing to me because based off of who my grandmother is, I don't have like great feelings toward her. And it's not that I feel like a lot of hate or anger, but my grandmother was, I will always just say I was just a number to her. All she cared about was like numbers and her righteous posterity. And I never felt known or loved, or and even my mom will say she had a very hard time expressing any kind of affection or love. So It was like I was grateful for kinda that message. She's been gone for probably 15 years. She died. But she let me know that she was helping me, and I've struggled because 'cause I'm like, I want to believe that, but also she's not a person that I trusted in this life, and she was just really rigid, and so, like, how do I trust that she's actually helping me, right? And I've had to juggle that, and I've done a lot of praying of, "Help me to be able to feel and believe that," because I do believe it, but I don't really feel it, and I still doubt it a little bit because my trust in her, based off of my experiences with her, it just they're at odds with each other. But as I was talking to my cousin and just really realizing I do know that she's with me, and my cousin expressed a knowledge that she and other ancestors are with me and helping me, and I just realized again, it's that concept of the hearts of the children will be turned to their fathers, and their fathers will be turned to the hearts of the children. Certainly, my grandmother knows that the things I'm trying to address and overcome have been handed down through her, that she is a part of it. And I believe that if I can heal myself and the future generations, that that healing then will go backwards and it will heal my mother and her mother. And I'm not responsible for it all. I'm just a transition figure, right? The savior is the healer, but we are called to do certain things in this life. And at first, growth always looks like destruction. You come, look at anything that needs to be made stronger. What does it need to do? It needs to break first. There are a lot of different parallels that we could draw between destruction and then ultimate growth and fortifying something. And I believe that that's what's happening. So if you are struggling with family relationships in this way, I think the reason we wanted to talk about generations is to have compassion for them, but also not lose sight of the fact that we have responsibility to change. And we have to have the emotional capacity and the wisdom to hold both of those truths together and not get down about them. It's like this generation did not serve us by a lot of the things that they passed on to us. We need to overcome it, but we can forgive them for it. And it feels paradoxical, but that's why Jesus is needed, because we're balancing a fine line and we need his wisdom and discernment to be able to do it in the right way.
Yeah. And to take that and expand it a little bit further of just the hearts of the children turning to the fathers. So the first time we see that in scripture is found in the book of Malachi, chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, where it says, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse." And some context for this, if we look then to the book of Luke, chapter 1, verse 17, this prophecy is applied specifically to John the Baptist. And why that is that he came with spirit and power of Elijah, we learn in those verses. And why did he do that? Well, we know that John the Baptist was there to help prepare the people for the coming of the Lord, for when the Savior would be born. And so then as we look at it in context, I personally believe, why do we have these generational tensions happening right now? We very much believe that Christ is going to come again, and we need to prepare our hearts for his arrival. And that is really cool to be a part of. To Ashley's point, that doesn't mean it's going to be just this smooth experience and that there's going to be no bumps along the way. Again, identifying the problem so that we can overcome this natural man and get rid of these rough edges and really come together for align ourselves with Christ, but align ourselves as husband and wife. That is the unit. That is the covenant marriage that we're talking about. You've got to get it right there first and foremost. And then you can go and expand to family and community and the world at large. But I believe our responsibility as covenant keepers and faithful followers of Jesus Christ is we've got to get our hearts right. And we also need to work to help other generations that have gone before us and those that will go after us. And that is the beautiful work of generational healing.
It's hard work. and it's brave, but I think that the rewards will be incredible, and I know that help does come, and it comes in miraculous ways. Last night, I wrote in my journal because as I was thinking about it, I saw so many miracles this week that I just felt like, wow, seeing the full scope of everything that's happened. Individually, you could pass it off as not much. But once I started to really think about it, I think the Spirit just told me, do not let this moment pass you by without seeing these as a series of miracles that will bring great change. And so I immediately went and got my journal and wrote them down. But we have to have eyes to see, and we have to develop that and believe that Christ is real and that his healing is real and working and happening in us when we come to him in sincerity and are seeking his help.
Wonderful way to end. Well, thank you, everybody. We will pray that you also can find those miracles in your life as you are engaged in this sacred work. We hope you have a great one.
See ya.
If this episode resonated with you, just know this. You're not crazy. You're not too much. And you're not alone in what you're seeing. What you're feeling is what happens when awareness meets systems that were never built to handle it. And yes, it's painful, but it's also where generational change begins. So whether you're in the middle of it or just starting to see things more clearly, stay in it. Stay grounded in truth and trust that doing this work, however imperfectly, is sacred work. We're really grateful that you're here with us. And before we wrap up, we want to also thank a sponsor that's really meaningful to us. If you've been following our work, you know just how much we care about connection, not just in life, but across generations. And one of the most powerful ways to preserve that connection is through story. That's why we love what they're doing over at Eterna Tribute. They offer something called a custom tribute song, where they take a story, memories, and essence of someone you love and turn it into a professionally written and recorded song. It's not just a gift, it becomes something your family can hold on to, return to, and pass down. It's a way to remember, a way to feel connected, a way to keep someone else's presence alive in a really meaningful way. We did this for my dad who passed away 18 years ago, and it has truly been such a special gift for us and our family. If that's something that resonates with you, you can check it out at eternatribute.com, and I'll also put the link in the show notes. And that's all we have for today. Hope you're having a great one.